Hey friends, and welcome back to the Mayhem Performance Podcast. This is episode number 24. And the last time we had Coach Sean McGovern on, we talked about the importance of muscular endurance training and identifying your limitations over just your aerobic fitness. And now we're going to flip that script a little bit because I know a lot of people had questions. Well, what if I am not enduring enough and I need to build a base? And now that we're going into the off season, Sean, for most people, obviously those that are training for the games or maybe other competitions, they are in the middle of their performance season. But for some of us, we're going into an off season where it is important that we build a base, and identifying how to do that well is important. None other than Sean to help walk us through that process. So Sean, I'll let you kind of kick it off, and the way that, how do you kind of like frame a build of someone's program in the off season if you know, okay, we have identified these limitations, but we need to build this base so that we can get them ready for their next performance-based season?
Yeah. I think something important to recognize that's specific to this podcast is I think we all have the same haircut. And that's kind of weird.
I like it.
So, but only two of us use product.
Please rank the hair on this podcast.
I've asked Brandon before. His just naturally sits that way.
That's nice.
Yeah, this is natural. I'll put product in if I need to, I guess, when it gets long.
Are you all natural?
All natural.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I tried all natural, but I kind of smelled. We're like, we can't go all natural. Doesn't work. Yeah, aerobic. So, I think from conversations that we've had at camps and our last talk on muscle endurance, really bolstered the idea of how important carbohydrates are, right?
Yeah.
So the chemistry on that side is the more exposed you are to carbohydrates, the more enzymes you're going to have, the better you're going to process that. And we're similar on the other side with fats. So whether we're thinking about how nutrition is going to impact that or what the training style looks like as well, they're all considerations that are important to create, as much as I hate the word, the flexibility around that so that you can use both of those substrates appropriately at the right times and potentially spare glucose and glycogen for later parts of a workout or an event. Those are important, but also being able to frame the purpose behind your aerobic training, the aspects of what are we trying to get better, right? Because if you set X workout in front of you that's predominantly aerobic, how you fuel is going to have a different effect on that, right? So if we're looking at increasing performance or VO2 max, whatever the case may be, and going into higher heart rate zones or whatever the case may be, being fasted or semi-fasted isn't going to get you there. So you could take that same workout and use it in two different types of your season, and purely based off of what your fueling looks like going into that is going to yield a different result. So again, with most people training the sport, whether they're recreational or on the higher level, we have to kind of identify how are people feeding around that and what's the net result that they're looking for versus the result that they're getting from that.
So let me cut you off real quick. Let's give two scenarios. We've got the athlete. Let's say that I'm this athlete. I choose not to fuel up the night before, and I go into the gym without eating because I'm intermittent fasting. I'm not going to eat until 1 p.m. that next day. And so it's 10 a.m. and you give me, because you're my coach, this long workout that's going to be relatively high intensity. And then you have Jake Foster.
Let me cut you off. I wouldn't do that. Keep going.
So that's our example one, because I'm going to force you into this. And then we have Jake Foster, who you're also riding for. He's doing the same workout, but he's fueled the night before. He's following all the prescriptions that you've given him. He's fueled the day of, and then he goes in and does the workout. What would be the difference, the main differences between he and I when we go into that workout?
Well, we saw that play out this morning.
It's just vice versa.
Yeah, literally.
You snuck in some carbs and didn't tell me.
True. Yeah.
I suffered. The interesting part is really, from an autonomic standpoint, when we're starting to think about hormones, like both you guys are going to go into that workout and let's just call the playing field even. Like one of you is going to go in a lot hotter on a higher level of cortisol, right? And that's going to be the fasted guy, right? Because you have a buffering mechanism of having glucose in and kind of working with insulin to level that stuff out. And cortisol being a glucocorticoid, and one of its main jobs is to raise glucose levels. If we have glucose in there, it's going to be kind of dampened down a little bit. So one of you are going to come in hotter, which also means you're probably going to fizzle out sooner. You're going to dump a bunch of catecholamines. Your body's not going to be able to keep up with that at a certain point to basically support the cardiac output that you're looking for within that aerobic endeavor. And probably, I wouldn't say bonk in a sense that you would see like marathon runners or distance runners not eating appropriately on purpose or accidentally, but you're going to see higher heart rates earlier, and you're ultimately going to be training a different pathway, right? Not from like an energy system standpoint, but more so like what fuels are going to be utilized and at what rate and how effectively based off of the intensity that you're looking for.
I think everyone's been there before too, because most people go into training underfueled and it does feel good. So let's just say it's like a 20-minute AMRAP. The first couple rounds of that AMRAP, I'm out in front. Foster's kind of, maybe lagging behind. I feel pretty good, but then all of a sudden 3 to 5 minutes in, I can tell that I can't control my heart rate anymore. I'm breathing harder than I'm usually breathing. And then maybe I start to feel a little bit of that lead type feeling in my legs because we're going back and forth between echo bike burpees and power snatches, whatever the example may be.
Gross.
Yeah. I wanted to make it gross. But I mean, I think everyone's been there, right? And that's a good sign that most likely it's one of two things. Either you're underfueled or you just completely mispaced the workout, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the intention behind it too is important, right? So for individualized, you're both fit, but it's like, who's going to be fractioning? Are we fractioning at the right time? Is the pace in which you're going at intended to be sustainable? Or should you kind of hit a bottleneck eventually, have to fight harder to keep that same rate going or whatever, right? So whether me as your coach, because I'm writing these horrible programs for you guys, if I put in like try to stay within a heart rate zone of X to Y, right? So that would be very off-season-y, right? Or it's, keep a sustainable pace, or it's keep a sustainable pace for 15 minutes and then gas it for the last 5, or some intricate version of every 5 minutes the pacing changes, right? So those are all aspects and intentions that are going to build that. But if we're going to go in with the intention of staying in like a higher zone 2 or just in zone 2 in general, then like you're going to be pacing accordingly based off of that. And the guy that went in fasted is actually going to be able to upregulate a lot of those enzymes that can help shuttle fat into the mitochondria, use it more efficiently, and develop the capillary density and mitochondria density required to get better at the sport, especially in like a mixed modal scenario like that, where the guy that's, pre-fueled with carbs is going to just perform better in general, but is going to, maybe not preferentially, but their like respiratory exchange rate and that crossover point is going to occur a lot faster because there's already carbs in the system and the body's wanting to use that.
So is there a time where you would have someone go into it fasted?
Off season. Yeah.
Okay.
So like, and that was kind of the point that I was starting with was, intentionality is everything, right? So if we are looking at building a base, improving mitochondrial density, capillary density, things like that, then being able to sustain a zone 2 pace. And I would start most people kind of on that monostructural side. So light running, fast walking, weighted walking, incline walking, things like that, depending on how fast they go hot within there, and being able to sustain in there to improve those mechanisms, either fasted or semi-fasted, to be able to utilize the body's innate ability to use fat as a fuel source, whether it's just fatty acids that are flowing through the body, being released because of this increase in cortisol, and then being able to really harvest that from the experience as well as dietarily.
For the athletes at home listening going, so you mentioned crossover point. Can you define what is the crossover point? What do you mean by that?
So if you put somebody on a VO2 max for metabolic cart, extracted the data from it, this is the point in which your respiratory exchange rates, it goes beyond like 0.85 where carbohydrates become the dominant fuel source over fat. So it's basically just the switch where it's like fats are just not being processed fast enough to sustain the amount of energy that's required for this output, given the amount of oxygen that's coming in.
Is it fair to say, like, it's typically a percentage of VO2 max is given, right? It's like 40 to 60%, depending on the athlete, is a rough range.
Right. And you want it within a certain range within there, and then you can start making judgments on them based off of that.
So to summarize, it's like, right, if you're at, let's say yours is 40% or mine is 40%, Brandon's is 60%, the crossover point. So once I start training or exercising at a point at which I'm now operating at 42% of my maximum aerobic power, I'm now dipping into
power output for sure.
Power output, yeah. Right? I'm now dipping into more carbohydrates as a fuel source as opposed to fat. But Brandon's is at 60%, so he's primarily right. He's primarily using fat. But why why is that preferential? Like drive that point home. Why would you want somebody with a higher crossover point where they're not using carbohydrates until later on in a workout or at a higher intensity?
Well, you're going to get more ATP per molecule or gram of fat to begin with, right? So it's high yielding, but it's slower. And that's why we typically see it in like longer, slower distance things, like, right, in lower intensities versus sprinting, explosive movements. You're more like Metcon style of training, right? Or HIIT training, however you want to look at that. So you have that aspect. Now, for CrossFitters specifically, or people that have to finish any event hard, that process is also glycogen sparing, right? So if we think of all the great things we've talked about with carbohydrates, stacking as much glycogen as possible pre-event, pre-workout, whatever the case may be, so that you can hit and go deeper into extended sets, be able to acquire more repetitions at the end of the day. Why not get as much of that out of fat first at a higher percentage of your power output, and then shift into that, spare all that glycogen for when it really starts getting hard and the heart rate's through the roof and you can't breathe anymore.
Yeah. I mean, you're limited on glycogen storage too. What is it? Somewhere between 400 to 600 grams between the liver and your muscle. Like you're going to, I think in total for most people, like, is that accurate?
Well, regardless of the number, it's going to vary based off of your level of hypertrophy as well. So a well-muscled athlete's going to be able to store more than a less. Yeah. So again, when we're going down to like the brass tacks of like how somebody's going to end in a workout or complete a workout for that matter, you got to look at those factors as well, right? And then how strong of a liver and respiratory system they have, so that when you do start losing air and you hit that lactic threshold, all that lactate that needs to go back to the liver, go through gluconeogenesis, become sugar all over again and be dropped back into the system to be picked up by other tissues. That's an efficiency point in itself, right? So folks that have been heavy drinkers in their previous life or are still being weekend warriors with their sport but drinking regularly, they're going to be a little bit compromised on that side based off of like how well their liver's operating. So liver, heart, lungs, all those things are playing. And then obviously mitochondrial density within different tissues. If someone predominantly was a runner, their legs are going to be great, but they hop on the rower and they're going to die. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see with a lot of athletes that get into CrossFit that had a great endurance background. Trust me, they're still better than me when they get on the rower, but there's a significant delta between the two of those where now the upper body is called into action and it just can't keep up.
Yeah. A better example is like a ski erg. You know, most of them, you get a runner on a ski erg and they completely blow up immediately.
It's like telling either of you to like get in a pool and be aerobic.
Totally. It's zero. I'm just holding my breath the whole time anyhow.
Like maybe treading water is aerobic for like a couple minutes.
I want to go back. You mentioned that you'll start this, or a good starting point would be incline walking or just a very light jog, or maybe it's just like a single modality on the rower or another cyclical machine that you may use in a CrossFit gym. Why start there? Why is that important?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if somebody's truly unfit in that area, I'd probably wouldn't even put them on a rower and echo maybe a C2 bike so that they can offload body weight and just use the legs, right? And like take a little bit more strain off the body. But for that matter, something like that, it's highly recoverable. It's a lot more controllable. And as much as I love the assault runners, true form, all those things, even putting them on a treadmill that dictates speed for them and then being able to adjust that and not have to rely on the ability of adjusting and constantly working through that if their connection to the movement isn't there yet, that's fantastic, right? So you can just keep auto adjusting, check your numbers, adjust. But for the folks that have a little bit more self-regulation on it, weighted walking, incline walking, you know, those give you that ability where you're like, I can walk slower, get immediate feedback, kind of like the rower, right? Like you're looking at watts or your 500 meter split and you're like, okay, let's try a couple strokes lower. Let's do longer, right? And you're like, okay, cool, that's adjusting my number. But you get to play in that and see how that affects your heart rate. And the longer or the more time accumulated within that zone, the more it starts to nudge that. And that threshold of your aerobic threshold then starts to get pushed to the right into higher heart rates, right? Your fat max starts to change. The amount of grams per fat that you burn in and around that fat max band then goes up, which shows that you have higher efficiency as well as density within there.
I would assume, just based on coaching a lot of people, that most, and you've seen this probably with your athletes, when they try to do this without any kind of monitor, they're always going too fast, too soon.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, the average non-athlete that I work with, like in clinic, they work out way too hard, right? You know, whether they're like trying to work on body composition or work within a range where they can clear cortisol, which zone 2 is fantastic for, improve all of like circulation along with that, but then also be able to bolster these things on the performance side as a base. People are working out way harder than they even know they are. And they're like, why aren't we getting results? I'm like, because the minute you go over this heart rate, you're just blasting carbs. When you run out of carbs because you're already on a low carb diet because you've been trying to lose weight or lean out or look amazing while working out without your shirt on, whatever the case may be, you're just raising cortisol levels, right? You're running off of fumes that are then going to have further adaptations into your thyroid, your gonads, testes, ovaries, whatever the case may be. And then we start to see this whole shift then decay from there.
Depending on the client, when would you, if ever, like I guess pros and cons of manipulating diet versus manipulating training timing. So you head in the off season, you want to try to delay that crossover point. You want to get people to utilize fat as a fuel source for longer, right? Spare, like you said, glycogen. You could do that two ways, right? You could do, like you're saying, you could do fasted, low intensity aerobic training, or you could manipulate their carbohydrate intake in the off season as well, right? So that more their training in general, although you wouldn't want it with the more intense training, like you said, because now cortisol levels are going up. What role does that have? Like, are you always going straight to, hey, like, we're just going to manipulate the time at which you train, or you're just going to do it first thing in the morning when you haven't eaten yet? Or are there times where you're like, actually, no, we're going to tilt the scale. I'm going to have you increase fat intake and decrease carbohydrate intake for a CrossFitter in particular?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that, it's also medium where they're at, right? So the nice thing about individualized programming like that is like we get to know our people, their situation. It's not just like a one size fits all adaptation, or application, right? You just throw your like, hey, do this. This is what all the people do. It works fine, right? So there's got to be a little give and take within there. The convergence point that I see as being the most important is the reconciliation between the carbs and the fats, right? In an ideal world, kind of, paying homage to the endurance world is training low and recovering high as far as carbs, right? And working through that, and then also taking into consideration that majority of your carbohydrates for recreational and, nudging towards that semi-pro world on that is also going to mean like your peri-workout nutrition should be pretty high carb, especially around resistance, high intensity training, sprinting, stuff like that.
Can you say why again? Go back, like you already mentioned it before with cortisol levels, but just drive that home. Like,
I mean, the differential between
sorry, real quick. I can imagine some people listening to this going, Sean is saying fasted training is good, right? So they're going to wake up in the morning.
Aerobic.
Yeah, right. Like they're going to wake up in the morning and they're going to do their strength training, muscle endurance, and a Metcon and be like, well, Sean said it's better. And maybe I'm just not trusting people enough, but yeah.
I mean, that's where periodization and prioritization goes in, right? Like if you're a relatively strong athlete, but your aerobic is horrific, then I'm going to front load aerobic work for you at the beginning of the day. You can go in semi-fasted or fasted, finish that, carb up in a 15-minute break, and then attack your resistance training and be somewhat fueled for that. Mm-hmm. Especially if you like ate a balanced meal for dinner or, your last meal of the day before, right? So we're not saying deplete all glycogen and go in just as a monster like that, but it's trying to manipulate the enzyme side of it to capitalize on the best ability to use that substrate, right? So in that sense, carbs, I mean, if anybody does not, for your basic client that eats a balanced diet, they eat carbs regularly. They're not trying to do Whole30, paleo, whatever, and try to still be a rock star in the gym, like from a performance standpoint. They know that because they've experienced that if you come into a resistance training session fasted or without carbs in general, you're going to feel weaker. I don't care what anybody says. Like, yell at me in the comments. I don't care. But the difference is if you always train fasted, then you're going to feel your regular. Now, is your regular better than fueled? Probably not, but you're going to still see linear progressions and gains within there. But your body's used to running off of lower glucose levels, and it is what it is. But you you compare that to somebody that has glycogen loaded, that has stable blood sugar levels, that are ready to get more to the tissue, and they're going to outperform them nearly every time in resistance training specific, right? Like you're going to outdo yourself or your counterpart almost every single time, right? Given all other scenarios are controlled, you didn't just like break up with someone the night before, right? Like whatever the case may be. So those aspects need to be somewhat controlled. And then you can't compare apples to oranges with that, right? But the carbohydrate side now, if we're talking about just aerobic, and in the example of like prioritizing aerobic first and then having carbs after that, that'll help bring a little bit of that stress down, right? In the same aspects that we started with. And then also, liquid carbs are notorious for getting into the system in like 10 to 15 minutes tops, right? So you're going to have fast absorption. You'll get your glucose levels back up. You kind of take your system off of high alert from that increased cardiac output that you needed from the running or whatever it was that you're doing. And now you're in a little bit better of a place than you would have been if you came into resistance training fasted. Now, you can balance a diet in that same respects where you can still have 250 to 300 grams of carbs, but you're just not putting it around your aerobic training unless it's like right after that, right? So that allows us to then, in that same adaptation that I was talking about before, when you go too low carb, too low calorie, whatever the case may be, the adrenals start to dog out, and then they start shutting down the thyroid or the gonads, right? Thyroid goes down, you're going to get less total T4 and T3 output in general. If all things are going chaotic, you're going to convert even less of your T4 to T3, which is 80% of the thyroid's production more times than not. So in general, T3 goes down. Well, what does T3 regulate? Hundreds of things, but most importantly in this conversation, it's going to be mitochondria and the quality of those as well as its biogenesis of it. So in energy expenditure. So when those things all tank, now you have less mitochondria, which means that fat max and your aerobic threshold is going to decrease, which means you've just done yourself a disservice by not having enough carbohydrates. So it's using fuel at the right time. And you can look at like tons of the other docs out there in nutrition, influencers, they have pyramids. I'm not taking shots at anybody. I think for the average bodybuilder and things like that, it's 100% on point. But the tip of the pyramid, which is like the least important of everything, is always timing, right? And that's fine for that aspect. But when we're talking about hitting peak performances and really changing the trajectory of our performance within our training, our nutrition and lifestyle, like those things are going to matter, right? And it's those things that are going to separate you from the pack of what are your competitors not doing. And if they're not taking those things into consideration, it's really easy to be someone that's really good at burning carbs, but suck at burning fat. And then you just did yourself a huge disservice. But if you can get the best of both of those worlds, you're also covering enough carbohydrates to keep your adrenals in line and make sure that your thyroid doesn't tank and your total energy production goes down along with that.
Well, even those influencers, you're referring to bodybuilding in particular, even the high level bodybuilders are dialed in on nutrient timing, because it could make the quote unquote 1% difference. But logistics for this, right? So people who are listening, they're like, I don't have time, Sean, for a double session. I only have time to train at 6 p.m. when I get done with work and I have a 90-minute window to work out. Is this even something that I should consider doing this off season? And if so, how in the world do I walk into the session fasted, so to speak? How do I even do that logistically?
I mean, that's where semi-fasted comes in, right? You can do low, moderate protein and fats in the breakfast. The breakfast? The breakfast.
That's what I call it. It's just the breakfast.
Lunch can be pretty similar. I'd probably go even lower protein just to be on the safe side. So you could kind of start high, go down low, ramp up fats a little bit. You roll into that training session at 6, predominantly just on fat at that point, right? And then you can knock out, 90 minutes is a lot of time, right? Like you can knock out a full aerobic interval session or a 20 to 30 minute zone 2, break that with some carbs, roll right into resistance, post-workout shake, get home, eat like a savage, try to get it done within 2 hours of going to bed.
Who are the athletes you would not use this for in the off season?
I mean, anybody with an eating disorder.
Okay.
To start.
Touche. I actually didn't think about that. Yeah. Who else though? Like, I have a particular group of people in my mind, but I'm not even sure if that's all right.
I mean, you got to keep it in the context of like our scope as coaches, right? I get to dabble outside of the lines a lot because being a licensed physician allows me to play in that, right? But ultimately, knowing the constitution of the person and what you're laying on them and what it's going to do to their physiology. So like anxious people that are already high stress, having them fast or intermittent fast or go low carb, all that's going to do is raise cortisol levels and potentially exacerbate issues like that. People that have like GI issues, the more you're running off of cortisol, the more you're decreasing blood flow to the GI. It's going to make it harder to recover, going to make it harder to do basically anything at that point. Like you're still absorbing, you're still breaking down, but it's just compromised at a level, especially if there's an underlying issue and now you're throwing more cortisol at it. Not only is it going to like reduce blood flow, but you're also increasing zonulin, which is going to open up tight junctions in the gut, create a little bit of permeability, again, more absorption problems, more white blood cell issues as far as like, why is there all this other food in our body that's not broken down, right?
What about somebody who just needs to get strong?
Why would you be doing aerobic in general?
That's what I'm saying.
No, I mean, I think...
Yeah, because you're going to have a lot of people, right? We've talked about it at length in podcasts. Like that's the vast majority of people, right?
That want to perform in CrossFit.
Correct.
For sure,
that want to perform in CrossFit.
They're not strong enough to play the game yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So for that, what would you say, where does this fit in somebody's off-season training for the weak Wendy, right?
Yeah.
The avatar that we've discussed in the past who just needs to get stronger.
Or weak Wayne.
Yeah, weak Wayne.
Either way.
Well played. Yeah. I mean, but that's really what's beautiful about program design. Having a coach that's writing a program for you is maybe that doesn't have a place in that person's program. Like off season, from my perspective is like we hammer things that get you bulletproof and we go after weaknesses, particular weaknesses that become limiters in sport specific movement or domains, right? So if you need to get a better squat, then you better be squatting, right? Can you improve your tissue's performance and how much mitochondria you have and things like that from doing more zone 2? Is that going to feed into more resistance training? Maybe negligibly. Like, are you going to see the result that you're looking for? It's not going to be like a PED for you. That's for damn sure. But what you can take into consideration, which I've seen empirically, is doing zone 2 first thing in the morning. Like let's just say like you woke up, jumped on an echo and you just spun the wheel for 30, 40 minutes. That's going to improve your recovery, which is going to allow you to get stronger, right? And ultimately even towards midday, end day, something like that, that can help bring down cortisol levels a little bit, right? So that has an impact. If you can use it to bolster better recovery, now you are going to get stronger. You may not be able to use it in the same sense of, increasing your aerobic threshold or how well you burn fats, but it is going to lend itself to recovery, which will ultimately make your weak Wayne or Wendy get stronger because their recovery is going to be at a higher level.
Yeah. I think the one caution that I give athletes, again, just going back to this, I already asked, but it's important to note that most people, when they think they're doing zone 2 sessions, are going much harder than that. And so if that's something that you want to incorporate, you need to make sure that you're measuring it correctly instead of just getting on. Because I see this in the gym all the time. Someone's just doing like an easy zone 2 session, but they're at 350 watts on the bike. And it's like, there's just no possible way. You're breathing hard. You can't nasal breathe at all. And then that ends up actually deterring from the strength training that they want to do later on.
Even the zone 2 though is going to have some level of interference, right? Oh, yeah. Like to use your favorite quote of all time, like there are no free lunches. Right. And then research and concurrent training has shown that like even low intensity or aerobic training will impede strength progress to some level. Right. Yeah. So how do you decide? You get weak Wayne, weak Wendy. How do you know how much? Is it just, hey, that's individualized? You just got to work with them. But where do you start? What about the people listening that are like, I can't hire you guys to coach me right now. I wish I could. I'm just not in the season of life to do that. Sean, how do I know if I'm that person who needs to get stronger? should I incorporate this? You said it could help with recovery, but now Jake is saying it actually could impede my strength progress. Like, where do I begin?
I mean, the more you stack anything on, like whether it's traditional concurrent training or you're just kind of adding a couple of little spicy things in it every now and then, everything is eventually going to start to take away from that, right? Because it's a intricate balance of trying to be entertained, work on multiple aspects of a sport that has way too many aspects, and then also see progress, right? Because if you just went in and you squatted 3 days a week, like, yeah, you'd get strong, but you'd eventually get bored. I mean, there's a couple of outliers in there that would be like, no, I can turn that into aerobic, trust me, right? Start doing intervals of like 60 to 70% of your squat max. But that'll even have a shelf life before that gets in the way, right? So you can look at it that way, but the easiest way to do it is you got to have some level of linear training built into your program, right? So if you need to get stronger, you squat on Mondays and whatever other day, right? And if you want to start to introduce aerobic training on top of that to help with your base training and just improving those areas of your aerobic ability, then you put them in and you go, okay, what's the average increase I would expect to see within this squat program? And if you're still hitting those numbers, you know, whether you're like a newbie or a, you know, intermediate, you can push that out 6, 12 weeks. And if you're still increasing every time, then who cares? But if you're 4 weeks in and you're dead and you're not making progression on that, then it's like, maybe it was the aerobic. Drop the aerobic, reset 2 weeks, build back. If you go right past it, then yeah, it was probably the extra training, right? And to Brennan's point, maybe you're just going too hard too, right? Like you can use the standard percentages for zones. And there's a couple out there within a variable of like plus or minus 5%. But ultimately, if you're serious about it and you want to use data to drive that, you do a VO2 max test, and based off of your max heart rate within there, it'll recalibrate those things and tell you what your true zones are so that you can more effectively work within there. Otherwise, you're literally just dropping, you know, like got nothing wrong with zones, right? And like the percentages generally work pretty good. But I know after my first zone 2 or my VO2 max, my numbers were way off. I recalibrated. I was like, holy cow, I'm recovering crazy from trail runs. Like I have no problem recovering from it because I'm actually in the right zone for the amount of time that warrants it. And I'm making improvements and my joints don't hurt. I'm not sore. I can still do plenty of resistance training and it doesn't get in the way. So it's just one more calibration point. If you're going to take this seriously and you want to have this vertical integration of all these elements, you got to do your homework too. I mean, that's the no free lunch part. Like you're going to pay money to get a test done. You're going to spend time organizing that. You're going to stick to a plan, even if you don't like it.
You're going to pay for a monitor.
Yeah. You're going to wear a heart rate monitor, whether it's a wrist or a chest strap. And you're going to use that data to drive that. Otherwise, we're just flying blind, which is fine for the recreationalist that just wants to hit all the different types and aspects of CrossFit as a training system. But is it truly going to give you a performance edge rather than make you more fit? And that's where you have to differentiate and draw a line in the sand and say, what is it that you actually want? You want to just be fit, look good naked, rock and roll, just wing it, right? Shoot from the hip on all these workouts. Go hot one day, don't go hot another day. Go really hot on a long workout. Like, I don't care. Like, as long as you're not getting hurt and you're recovering, cool. But if you want to improve performance, you got to play within the guidelines. We're not making stuff up. Right? This is like sports science has been used for however long. You can say every single topic within there is contentious, but there's a reason that it works. It sets up a framework and guidelines. And the more our training starts to emulate that of other professional sports, the longer shelf life people are going to have, the smarter training they're going to have. Do you need $50,000 of tech to be able to do that? No. Like we're not franchise teams out here with sponsors and billion-dollar budgets, right? But we can leverage what we have, use that, make better decisions. Because that's all you need to do. Just make better decisions, look at what the output is, and then pivot when you have to.
So to kind of wrap things up then, Sean, what would you do in the off or at what point in the off season would you start to shift away from maybe this style of training into a phase where now you're starting to think about, okay, they got to get back into a performance phase, and how do you do that?
Yeah. Oh, we're going to get contentious. No, so I've thought about this a lot. It's been something on my mind. I mean, I'm looking at VO2 max data at our clinic like all week. You know, I think every one of our patients do one either at intake or within their first couple months of working with us. So I'm seeing tons of data. I see what a lot of the trends look like for your average normal humans versus your athletes and your more performance driven people. And the thing that I've really put a lot of thought into was, you know, within a very short period of time, whether it's the same day and like a 6-hour difference or next day, depending on recovery for the person, I would literally do a VO2 max test on a rower. And then given the person's logistics, maybe 6 hours again, 6 hours later, do it again on a treadmill. The average person's gonna be like, that's stupid. It's like, yeah, maybe, but you got to assume there's a little bit of a fall off on that second test. Now, if anyone's ever done a VO2 max test, you know it's really only the last couple of minutes that are hard, right? Now, if you're really high level, obviously that's going to be different. But you can look at the differential between those two, right? Your goal would be an off season, and you can partition that out. And let's just say you got 3 months, right? So for 6 weeks, we're going to develop your aerobic system, improve not only your aerobic threshold, but your anaerobic threshold, shift all that to the right. And then that next chunk of time, whether it's 6, 8, 12 weeks, whatever the case may be, we're then going to bolster that as your base. And then we're going to try to drive your row VO2 max as close to your running VO2 max as humanly possible. Because now you got deep knee and hip flexion. You got shoulder rotation, arm flexion. You got a little bit of hinging, right? It's starting to emulate the sport a little bit more, even with it being an element of the sport. And then that gets you close enough to start getting into in-season training where you're more Metcon driven. And I think row is like the perfect bridge from running, which is like probably the most innate small range of motion component that you can derive a high VO2 max from. Then you get into rowing, then you get into your mixed work. We're not going to test that with the VO2 max because that's stupid, but because you'd have to do the same workout over and over, right? And heart rate dependency is going to be based off of the modality that you're doing. So you can't just do Fran and be like, oh, my VO2 max is this and my max heart rate's that, and then plan all of your Metcons based off of those numbers. It doesn't work, right? Just like most people are going to have a higher max heart rate on a Metcon opposed to their VO2 max. We usually see it about 10 to 15 points lower on a VO2 max because their heart rate's not the thing that's given out, right? So I would use those as kind of transitional points. And you could argue there might be a place for like an echo bike in there since there is arms and legs. It's a little bit more full body. Maybe that's a better transition from running to the row, but you run into muscle endurance being a huge piece. So when we do serum lactic acid testing for threshold at our facility, we predominantly do for our athletes on a C2 bike or an echo because we're looking at how fast those quads fatigue and then being able to use that as a secondary point to look at for our athletes after VO2 max testing. Different sessions, but more data, and then we can see what that drift looks like in the projected lactic acid in a VO2 max, as well as the actual when we're looking at how fast and how effective the liver and cardio system can clear that lactic.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I almost want to go back to your question again, just to get what part is contentious? Because none of that sounded contentious to me.
The differential between the row and the run. I think that's what most people will get hung up on. But for me, being involved with the sport for since 2007,
yeah,
and looking at strength and conditioning as objectively as possible over the last 20 years, that makes the most sense to me. And we're collecting data on that. Hopefully in a year's time, we'll have a good idea of what that does look like as far as what a common differential is and how close you want to get those two to at least be suggestive of what a high performer could look like for the sport as it applies. And then if we can throw that at leaderboard numbers in comparison, we'll start to get somewhere on that aerobic side.
To drill down on Brandon's question, one more aspect though would be like, at what point are you saying, and without saying it depends, hey, we gotta pull back on this single modality work, and we need to just play the game.
I mean, you got a whole year, right? The difficulty is multiple comps within a season.
Yeah.
Right. And never having enough time to have a full off season or enough time to actually work on one specific modality. That might be the biggest hole. Like more times than not, most people are more than happy to work on their squat all year long. Right. And then you get to comp season. They're like, hey man, I only squatted like once this week. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like, but I'm not getting stronger. It's like, it's not time for that. Mm-hmm. We're not doing that right now. Right. But we got to, whether it's muscle endurance or aerobic, whatever the case may be, like you got to put a fair emphasis on whichever one is the one that needs help.
Yeah.
Not neglect that. And aerobic, I mean, as far as the sport's concerned, I mean, it's a huge foundation for it, right? So you could argue it's equally as important. I know we have a lot of data that suggests strength is probably the bigger predictor, as is muscle endurance in some scenarios, skill specific. But ultimately, if you want to get better, you got to get better at everything.
Yeah.
Right. And we're beyond the time of dark horses coming out of nowhere with some weird background in sport that we're like, oh, they were an X player in college. And it turns out those guys are all really, or gals are really good at CrossFit. It's like, that's over. Like we got people that have been training the sport since they're like 15 now.
Lower than that, man. It's crazy. Yeah.
Right? And they're crushing it now. Right. Yeah. It's like gymnasts. Like male gymnasts peak at like 20, like mid 20s or whatever, right? But it's because they needed all those exposures. They needed all those reps to get to that level, to be at an Olympic level for that. Mm-hmm. And we can't just go around being like, well, I'm the best one in the box and I should be able to get better because I do X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, like hate to be the bearer of bad news. And I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but it's like, you're going to have to dial things in. You're going to have to do what the higher level people do and then some, if you want to change that trajectory, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good topic at some point we should cover is like how to navigate. It's like the pro and the con. People get to play more throughout the year now. There's more off-season competitions. We'll call them like mid-majors. I don't know what to call them, like a Wadapalooza or something like that. But man, it's just everybody's always competing.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough though, because especially for the high-level athletes, they have to.
Sure.
A lot of them have contracts, and now with WFP, and I know that they are maybe Tier asked them to do Wadapalooza, and
they've already got the fitness.
Yeah,
they're
but
there.
Still, I mean, with those people, they have. How do we handle these 12 competitions that are all 2, 3, and 4 day competitions that are going to require a ton of energy to do?
What's the interval between a lot of those?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. 4 to 5 weeks, and they're doing another one, and. So, I mean, there are challenges. The other side of the coin is maybe the beginner that is doing too many just because they want to have fun. It's like, well, let's probably take a step back and pick 1 or 2 to do so you can actually get better.
And that's where they have to really draw a line in the sand and go, hey, is this recreational for me? Which is fine.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Like I'd say it all the time. It's better than a beer league softball at the park, right? Like we're making progression here, right? Yeah. We're not drinking 3 nights a week playing softball. Nothing against softball, but realistically, like that, those kind of go together really well. If eating healthy and doing CrossFit or whatever is a better option, I'm all for it. And if you want to do comps all the time, all for it. But if you want to get better, you're not going to get better doing more unless you're, fresh, right? Where you're just like, you're learning what intensity feels like. You're starting to figure out what it is you're capable of and what intensity and what areas are like for you. Like just playing it, you feel that out, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're somewhat seasoned, you've been in it for a couple of years, like you're not going to get better doing that.
What would you, summarize the key takeaway this off season, like real quick, like from this whole talk, crossover point, or you say convergent point?
Well, the convergence more of like finding that happy overlap of timing and quantity of carbs and fats where they're not starting to negatively affect each other.
What's the biggest takeaway athletes listening to this right now? What do they need to walk away with like this off season?
Being able to utilize the proper fuel for the proper intensity. If you're always going hot, you're going to go straight to sugars. You're not going to utilize the slower, more abundant energy source that fat can provide, whether it's dietary or from body fat, whatever the case may be. Right. So being able to train up those different areas and just have a little bit of variance within timing of food or training, and again, most people, I got 2 kids. at one point I was in medical school with a full-time job, all those things, and I still found time to train. That's not everybody's scenario, right? Some people may have more on their plate, less on their plate, and still not be able to figure it out. But there always is an opportunity to like not do something else that's wasting your time and go for a weighted run or a weighted walk or a power walk or something like that to start to develop that if it's important to you. If it's not important to you, you're not going to find time for it. If you can't sacrifice a normal WOD or training session of resistance training to improve on your aerobic, then you don't care about aerobic. Like cut one of those sessions and instead of lifting that day, work on your aerobic. If you can't justify that, you don't care enough to do it then.
Well said.
That's a wrap.
All
Thanks,
right.
Sean.
See you guys.